What's good, everyone? Welcome to the Dork's channel. I'm Mike, and I'll be your Cantrip Advisor. This is a special episode where I bring you one of my personal decks, Teysa Karlov. This deck is a classic aristocrat's strategy, sacrificing permanents and getting death triggers aplenty. In this video, I'll show you how this deck works, what it's made of, and how you're going to win with it. Let's dive in. As I mentioned before, our commander is Teysa Karlov. She costs 2, a white and a black, for a 2/4 legendary human advisor that reads, if a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. She also has, creature tokens you control have vigilance and lifelink. There's so much value stapled onto this one commander that you could build 2 completely different decks with her in the zone. But for this tech, we'll be focusing mainly on the doubling of death triggers. Our main strategy in this deck is to play lots of low-cost creatures with death triggers, play other permanents that benefit from other creatures dying, and sacrifice as many creatures as we can with our commander on the battlefield. This deck is packed with double death value. First up is our ramp package. In black-white, there aren't that many options for a direct ramp, so we need to work around it a little bit. Land tax is 1 white for an enchantment that reads, at the beginning of your upkeep, if an opponent controls more lands than you, you may search your library for up to 3 basic land cards, reveal them, put them into your hand, then shuffle your library. This can get us ahead on mana early, so we don't have to worry about that later. Sol Ring is a great turn 1 play because, if you have your colors, you could cast Teysa on turn 2. Ashnod's Altar is a 3-drop artifact that says, sacrifice a creature, add 2 colorless to your mana pool. This card works twofold in this deck. It offers us a sacrifice outlet for our creatures, but also adds some mana to our pool to ensure we can cast our spells. And finally, in our ramp package is Smothering Tithe. For 3 and a white, this enchantment says whenever an opponent draws a card, that player may pay 2. If the player doesn't, you create a treasure token. This card is just a bomb in EDH and should be put into almost every white deck if you can afford to. Next up, let's look at our Fodder. These are cards that have death triggers on them that will then be doubled by Teysa's ability. Blister Grub, Nocturnal Feeder, Serrated Scorpion, and Tattered Mummy all drain our opponents 2 life and gain us 2 life when they die. Driver of the Dead is 3 and a black for a 3/2 that says, when Driver of the Dead dies, return target creature card with converted mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. With over a third of our creatures having 2 CMC or less, this creature really comes in handy for some recursion. Mausoleum Guard, Desperate Sentry, and Deathbloom Thallid all create tokens when they die. Mausoleum Guard creates 2 1/1 spirits with flying, Desperate Sentry creates a 3/2 colorless Eldrazi Horror, and Deathbloom Thallid creates a 1/1 green sapperling when it dies. Keep in mind, these tokens will be doubled off of Teysa when that creature dies. Next, let's look at our Dork of the deck. The Dork of the deck is the card that takes this deck to another level and really makes it run to its fullest potential. Now, I know it's a little early in the deck tech to bring it out, but it belongs in our fodder category. And that card is Reassembling Skeleton. For 1 and a black, you get a 1/1 Skeleton Warrior creature that says, pay 1 and a black, return Reassembling Skeleton to the battlefield tapped. This card works so well with any other death value we might have on the battlefield, and as long as you have a free sacrifice outlet and the mana to pay for it, you can get as many death triggers as you can afford with this bag of bones. Our next card is Treasure Keeper. This card is only being played in 4.4% of Teysa decks according to EDH Rec, but I think it should be played in way more. When Treasure Keeper dies, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-land card with converted mana cost 3 or less. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Put all revealed cards not cast this way on the bottom of your library in a random order. This triggers twice off of our commander and has so much potential to really fill out our board. Either it's going to get us some more fodder, or it will bring us some ways to sacrifice those creatures. And while we're on this cantrip, let's head over to the Outlet Mall and browse through our sacrifice outlets. These are cards that allow us to sacrifice creatures at instant speed to actually trigger our death triggers. First up is Altar of Dementia. This card is 2 colorless and reads, sacrifice a creature, target player mills cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power. The milling is not the important part here. What is important is the free sacrifice at instant speed. Carrion Feeder is 1 black for a 1/1 zombie creature that says, Carrion Feeder can't block. Sacrifice a creature, put a +1/+1 counter on Carrion Feeder. Nantuko Husk, my favorite card, is perfect in this deck. It's 2 and a black for a 2/2 zombie insect creature that says sacrifice a creature, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Even though this deck does not aim to win through combat damage, if you have a sizable board and swing with lots of creatures and Nantuko Husk, your opponents will have a tough time deciding how to block. Viscera Seer is a 1-drop black for a 1/1 vampire wizard that says sacrifice a creature, scry 1. Keep in mind that this and Nantuko Husk's abilities are activated abilities and therefore do not trigger twice. My favorite sacrifice outlets in this deck come in the form of lands. Phyrexian Tower taps for a black and says, tap, sacrifice a creature, add 2 black to your mana pool. And High Market taps for a colorless and allows us to tap, sacrifice a creature, and gain 1 life. These are perfect to draw into because they're 0-cost, free sacrifice outlets. Next, let's look at what other value we can get from our creatures dying in our Battlefield Value package. Blood Artist, Zulaport Cutthroat, and Cruel Celebrant all drain our opponents 1 life and gain us 1 life when creatures we control die. Sifter of Skulls and Pawn of Ulamog are creatures that create Eldrazi tokens when our creatures die. These tokens can be sacrificed to add colorless mana to our pool. Sir Conrad the Grim is 3 and 2 black for a 5/4 that reads, whenever another creature dies or a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves your graveyard, Sir Conrad the Grim deals 1 damage to each opponent. And it has pay 1 and a black, each player mills a card. This card can go nuts in this deck, but also can throw off any other strategies at the table. If someone's playing a mill strategy, they might not target you because they don't want to lose life. Our next card is really fun in this deck, and that's Cauldron of Souls. Cauldron of Souls reads, tap, choose any number of target creatures. Each of those creatures' gains persist until end of turn. I say this is fun because in response to a board wipe or before you sacrifice your entire board, you can give all your creatures persist, allowing them to come back on the battlefield and then be sacrificed again. With our commander on the battlefield, this will wind up being 4 death triggers for each permanent, and more often than not, that's enough to win the game. Next up is Grim Haruspex. For 2 and a black, you get a 3/2 with Morph that says, whenever another non-token creature you control dies, draw a card. Midnight Reaper is 2 and a black for a 3/2 zombie knight that reads, whenever a non-token creature you control dies, Midnight Reaper deals 1 damage to you and you draw a card. And finally, Skull Clamp is a 1-drop equipment that says, equipped creature gets +1/-1. Whenever equipped creature dies, draw 2 cards, and it has equip 1. If we were to equip this onto a creature with 1 toughness, we would draw 4 cards alongside any other death triggers we have on board. Before we get to our mana curve and land base, let's take a look at our removal package. We can't fully power through to win the game without taking care of some of our opponent's things, and we're in the best colors to do it. Attrition is a 3-drop enchantment that says, pay a black, sacrifice a creature, destroy target non-black creature. Angelic Purge is 2 and a white for a sorcery that reads, as an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a permanent. Exile target artifact, creature, or enchantment. This is a 1-time sacrifice outlet stapled onto a removal spell. Doomscar is 3 and 2 white for a sorcery that says, destroy all creatures. It also has Foretell for 1 and 2 white. And I run both Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile as cheap spot removal. They're both 1-drop instants that exile a creature. Swords has that creature's controller gain life equal to its power, and Path to Exile has that player search for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield, tapped. Martyr's Bond is 4 and 2 white for an enchantment that says, whenever Martyr's Bond or another non-land permanent you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a permanent that shares a card type with it. This allows us to control our opponent's board and ensure that nobody is getting ahead. Also, off of Teysa, these triggers will double creature deaths and force our opponents to sacrifice 2 creatures. Finally, while this is not battlefield removal, it still deserves a spot in this deck. Crypt Incursion is 2 and a black for an instant that says, exile all creature cards from target player's graveyard. You gain 3 life for each card exiled this way. It's always good to run some graveyard removal, but this can sometimes work on our graveyard. If we've sacrificed enough creatures, we can exile all of them to gain a bunch of life back and re-establish ourselves in the game. Our mana curve is pretty low for this deck. The height of our curve is at 2, and with 48 of our spells being 3 CMC or lower, our average mana cost per spell is 2.75. Like I said, this is pretty low, but it allows us to be sure we can cast everything in our hand and not just one spell per turn. If you liked what you saw here and you want to see the whole deck list, consider supporting us directly through Patreon. Our patrons get sweet perks and benefits like access to our decks, early listening and viewing capabilities on our content, customized tokens, and more. Head over to themanadorksmtg.com to find our Patreon link and links to any other content you may have missed. Follow us on social media at themanadorksmtg and feel free to reach out with anything you'd like us to know. Well, this has been the Cantrip Advisor on the Mana Dorks channel. I'm Mike, and we'll catch you next time.